The war at this point, and I can't even call it a war, more like an occupation and a putting down of a rebellion within the context of that brutal occupation. But within the context of that, within an open air ghetto, news offices, those news offices were very clear that they were news offices. And despite repeated calls for Israel to basically not blow those news offices up, this took place.
This is the moment an Israeli missile strike destroyed.
Yes. Israel, on that particular day, took down multiple buildings. I think that was like the third, fourth, how many other buildings. They have killed up to this point 200 and something people, with 60 being kids. I think it's like a third of them, maybe more than a third of the people being killed at this point or being children. Think to yourself for a moment, why are so many kids being killed? And do you honestly believe that all of these kids are being used as human shields? Hamas is just walking around with kids on their backs. Or is it that this is an open air ghetto? It is a small, densely packed area. And if you are going to use missiles to knock down buildings, there is no, this is not a war. Because it can't be a war. Because Israel doesn't acknowledge that Palestine is another country. That's the first point. On the other point, how is there a war when there is no Navy on the other side? There's no Air Force on the other side. There is no nuclear weapons on the other side. They don't have a superpower as an ally giving them billions of dollars or political cover in the United Nations. I mean, this is the third time that the United States blown off some kind of security resolution to bring these guys to account. But they took down and leveled a building. Mind you, people lived in that building. And despite giving a heads up, Israel basically gave these guys an hour before taking that building down. Now, despite hundreds of people being killed, people really get edgy when you go after media because they call it a war crime. And of course, media is reporting that media is being attacked. So media is extra hysterical when media is reporting about media being attacked. Oh my God, it was shocking. It was more shocking than the other shocking killings of children that have been taking place over the last X amount of time. Here's the thing. You have all sorts of people who are trying to back up the Israeli position in media. And in this very specific case, it's a weird media space for me because right now it seems that people are more questioning like, whoa, this seems to be a lot of people dying. And what is Joe Biden going to do about all of these people dying? As if they forgot about the 2,000 people that were killed back during when Obama was in office. It's as if people have this kind of different tenor in their head in regards to the level of violence they're accepting. But the thing is, you can't argue to me that what is considered to be a war crime is somehow doing it right. And that is basically what Israeli, the gentleman who basically works for Netanyahu, Prime Minister, he's a senior, Mark Regev, a senior advisor, Israeli Prime Minister, senior advisor, Mark Regev. In a moment, Mark is going to give you an argument that knocking down that media building, AP and Al Jazeera, that was somehow Israel, classic example of Israel, doing it right. I'm going to let him make his case. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you allowing me to do it. This is day 9. Israel, there's 212 people that have been killed. You have 20 Israelis that have been killed, or 10 Israelis, I'm sorry. 1,300 people injured. 4,733, occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. 796 in Israel. 61 children killed. 61 children killed. That means nearly a third of the people that have been killed in this are just children. Let's hear Mark make his case about how striking a media building is not trying to close the eyes of the press and make it more difficult to cover what Israel is doing in the war crimes that are undoubtedly ensuing in those occupied territories, the open-air ghetto. No, that's not what that is at all. That's more Hamas, of course. There's always the ubiquitous Hamas person. And it's because of Hamas, which is the reason why they struck the building and why it is Israel. Classic example, doing it right once again. Let's hear him out.
And this example of this building, of this high-rise, is a classic example of Israel doing things right. There was not a single casualty. No journalist was hurt. No journalist, heaven forbid, was killed. We gave an hour's warning so they could clear out the building. In so doing, of course, we allowed Hamas to clear out as well. But the goal was to neutralize what was an important Hamas target from
Will
our
you
perspective.
show us the evidence?
succeeded
We
without the
journalists,
loss of
will
life.
we see this evidence, Mark Regev?
Praising Israel. This is a good, clean, surgical strike against a legitimate target without any collateral damage.
Well,
It's
as
surely
you
a
know
good
full
thing.
well, it's not my job to praise any country or any government for what it
True.
does, but to get to the truth. And the truth here is that we have not seen evidence of any Hamas activity in that building. The other question is, why take down an entire structure? And by the way, Doctors Without Borders said one of its clinics was taken out. You have major infrastructure damage to Gaza, which is a territory that's hemmed in with millions of people unable to leave. They don't have the air raid sirens. They don't have the bomb shelters. Do you believe, as some have said, that the Israeli response has been disproportionate?
Definitely not. We've had over the last week some 3,000 rockets fired by the Hamas terrorists against our people. They're trying to murder Israeli civilians by deliberately targeting our cities in an indiscriminate way. They're trying to kill innocent Israelis. We're trying to stop that.
Now, keep in mind, the reality of this is that in East Jerusalem, they are basically stealing territory. This is after expropriating and stealing territory for decades. This is not a religious conflict. This is not, it's a mystical conflict and thereby difficult to... No, this is very practical. This is about land. And in the context of that land, in the very immediate vicinity, immediate reality, temporal time period, Israel is stealing land. Hamas is responding to the fact that they're stealing land. And yeah, there's certain politics that is being played, but at the very bare bones of it, does Palestine and Palestinians have a right to protect themselves and their property? Yay or nay? And if the answer is no, then why does Israel have a right to protect some kind of property? Meaning, if you endow one with the ability to defend and protect themselves, then you have to endow the other with the same ability to defend and protect themselves. If so, that's their land. And Israel has been stealing it for decades. And that goes beyond stealing of the land. You're talking about the repression, the putting kids in prison, the torture, the abuse, the lawlessness, the theft of territory, just willy-nilly. They're trying to make it like this is just a legal dispute. This is just a real estate dispute. This is not just a real estate dispute. They always, colonizers, change and put this stuff into law. as if the law in and of itself is some kind of mystical thing. No, it's something that they put in the books for the explicit purpose of taking that land and that territory, which is exactly what they're doing. The idea, you're going to call that, yes, you could say it was a quote-unquote surgical strike by our great weapon manufacturers in the United States, and that we've probably even paid for those weapons. And Joe Biden, impressed by the weapons, has re-upped $735 million in weapons to Israel. So that's great that that's taken place. They struck a media building. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew it was a media building. They were told it was a media building over and over again. They were told that there were no Hamas in the building. There is no evidence that there was ever Hamas in the building. This is just Israel striking the building. They would never produce any evidence. They're not going to care about producing any evidence, and they're going to move on. I know this because they've done this before by going after journalists and other military campaigns. Right here. The Committee to Protect Journalists today, following a series of strikes that injured at least 9 journalists and damaged several offices. Quote, Israel should respect its obligations under international law. Israel does not, it's an apartheid state that attacks its neighbors constantly, steals land voraciously. International law is not something they care all that much about. Let's be honest. So let's keep going. At least 7 journalists were injured in the first attack at 2 a.m. when missiles hit the 11th floor Al-Hawarshi Tower, which is home to Al-Quds TV. A news report said Qadir Al-Zadar, a cameraman for Al-Quds TV, lost his right leg and an explosion was taken to the Egyptian hospital for treatment, the report said. Other Al-Quds TV journalists, Omar Al-Ifraz, Al-Hussein, Al-Mud, etc., etc. At about 7 a.m., a second airstrike hit the 15th floor near Al-Shuk Tower, home to Al-Aqsa, news report said. No Al-Aqsa journalists were reported injured, but the offices were completely destroyed. My point is, they have a tendency to go after journalists. And that's not just going after the media offices in this particular case, but even if you're looking at the protests that take place, oftentimes journalists are the target that they are going after. My point is, this is not them, quote unquote, doing it right. And there's always there's a Hamas shield. There's a baby shield that they're putting there. Those are telegenically dead Palestinians. I heard Netanyahu say one day, telegenically dead Palestinians, that you've been basically bombing as if somebody is forcing your hand to steal more land, forcing your hand to be more voracious and your appetites, forcing your hand to attack the people during Ramadan at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Nobody was forcing your hand to do that at all. You did that. All of those things were being done by you. And it's not so much to deify Hamas. It's not that these guys are great people per se. It's more so that their cause at this point is more just. One side is stealing land voraciously and has done so for decades. One side is living in a situation that is basically an open-air prison where the electricity is spotty, where their access to resources are basically non-existent, where the even access to things like water are somewhat spotty. And they've just taken down infrastructure that was already decapitated. And, these are conditions that these guys are living in constantly. It's a pressure cooker of conditions. And it explodes. Now, their politics going into undermining Abbas that is in the West Bank. And like I said, there was supposed to be an election that was held. And if that election was held, I suspect he would be greatly unsatisfied with that result. And despite the death toll that's taking place, Hamas will most likely gain support. It comes across as if it's fighting for something. Now, the reality of it is, it's been able to connect this kind of movement across multiple, like, Palestinian and Israelis, or Israeli Palestinians. But Jesus Christ, it is costly. I mean, you're talking about 200 dead Palestinians, 60%, the 30% being children. And whatever the political objectives are, and whether those political objectives are going to be accomplished or not, is secondary to whether or not it's just. Meaning, do people have a right to defend themselves? Yes, Palestinians damn well have a right to defend themselves. And in doing so, this is kind of the reaction that you get, per se. By the same token, I don't know. It's just to make that argument that is just, that is them doing it right, them going after the media is them doing it right. Look, there's always going to be a terrorist. There's always going to be a Hamas fighter. There's always going to be a immigrant. There's always going to be whatever that thing is that allows them to justify whatever they did, even if they need to justify retroactively. And this very specific case, their argument was, hey, there's Hamas in the building. How do you know? How do you prove it? They don't have to. They don't have to. It's that simple. And because they don't have to, they're going to move on, just like they moved on when they were going after the other journalists in the past. This guy is a hack. And he's basically trying to explain war crimes in real terms. Don't get me wrong. The killing in and of itself should be considered war crimes. Like I said, this is not two competing militaries. This is them taking down just basically buildings. Go think about an apartment building in your city, a missile taking that building down, and then going to another one, taking that down. And think of it as, that's not going to be rebuilt. Think about the infrastructure that's already labored. Think about the ability to get to clinics for like COVID testing, or the ability to get to hospitals. All of that stuff is already under stress. And they've just added that much more stress to the situation. Yeah. It's unfortunate. I mean, look, you let people make their case. But yeah, attacking the press. Israel doing it right. It's not Israel doing it right, but it is classic Israel. That's the point that I'm trying to make here. And look, a short trip into anybody on Twitter will show you some of the things that are taking place over there right now. The roving gangs of people attacking Palestinians on the street, the military attacks, basically the police strikes, also going after journalists on the ground. Yeah, it's not good. And Bibi is that motherfucker. His ability to stay in power is astonishing, because right now, with everything that's taking place, he is going to milk this for everything that it's worth, to basically say, I am the only one that can protect you. I am Bibi Netanyahu. Keep me in office. And the catch becomes whether or not the judiciary or the courts are somehow swayed by that. And I suspect they are. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.